Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shawn Schreckengost. I'm a TriStar Business Development Manager, and welcome to today's presentation for Onshape. We're going to discuss real-time CAD data management with cloud-native release and approval workflows. So I want to start by just kind of talking about our digital transformation to the cloud. I mean, if you think about when computing first started back in the 60s, and a lot of the computers were very large, more mainframe type computing, and these typically required a lot of facility and a lot of maintenance and wires and racks and whatever else was involved. Some tape machines and large disk drives, and you think about that, they weren't very accessible to a lot of people at the time. Well, by the 80s, we started moving into more of a client server type situation, and more and more people started having access to computing and even personal computers, if you will, desktops and so on. And a lot of the applications were still, though, client server applications. We think about Oracle and SAP and so on, where you had a server that served the database, and then the client ran the software and accessed the database. Well, today's applications are really moving more towards the cloud. I mean, a lot of you use your cloud in the iPhone, right? If you have an iPhone, everything you take a photo of is automatically uploaded into the cloud. So, that's where we are today. Although some of you are using some CAD tools out there, such as Pro Engineer or SolidWorks or CATIA, that are not necessarily cloud-based. And so we're going to talk about today doing CAD data management with a cloud-native type CAD software. So first, let's talk a little bit about why product development is lagging behind. A lot of it has to do with how we got to where we are today. So we'll talk a little bit about the history of product development. When I started doing product development, and I'm kind of dating myself here, I started in a situation like you're seeing here on the screen, where we worked in a drafting room where there was an array of drafting boards, and you sat at this desk all day long and created drawings or maintained drawings, did revisions and so on. And I worked out in China Lake, California, at the Navy base out there. It was just one of the largest naval bases in the world, where they develop and test their airborne weapon systems, but very similar to what you're seeing here. And then we had a file cabinet that you can see in the back of the room there that held our drawings. And what we would do is we'd come in and get our assignments for the day, and they would be labeled to which drawer they were in, and we'd go to the drawer and pick out our drawing. And whether it was a new drawing, we might have had a data sheet to create the new drawing. If it was a revision, we had the original vellum and then an ECO or ECN paperclip to that, and then we'd bring that back to our desk and make those changes or make the new drawing and then submit that for review and approval. So very, very antiquated system, of course. And if we had, to use, hardware, we had a fish tape machine that we would go and pull our specs from for, mil spec hardware, nuts and bolts or connectors or what have you, so that we knew how to create those by hand on our drawings. We had the specs available to us. So, some of you on this call may be familiar with this stuff, but this goes back, quite a ways. So when we talk about data management, of course, we had this file cabinet. So we took our work out of the file cabinet, and at the end of the day, we put it back in the file cabinet. Sometimes these file cabinets were in a secure location, in a vault, literally like a bank vault, to where if it was a classified or secret type document, they would have to be locked up at the end of the day. And we also had a separate room to work into if we had to work on these drawings, and we didn't want anybody that didn't have a clearance to see what we were working on, of course. But needless to say, that's what our data management system looked like back then. Okay, so if we take a look at what we really started doing with CAD back in an early mainframe type system, and I first learned CAD in the early 80s, working on a system called Applicon Bravo, and I did that for about a year, and then went to work for another system on the base out there, which was called Computer Vision CADS 4 at the time. And so we had working out in the desert, we had a building that we worked in, and because it was a mainframe system, it was kept cold because of all the wires, and the floor was raised. And I mean, we were working out in the desert. We literally had to wear a jacket into the CAD room to keep warm, because they kept it at a certain temperature. In the summer, it's 110 degrees in the shade, but in that CAD room, it was like 68 degrees. So you can get an idea of what we had to go through there. But we supported military weapons systems, specifically for the Navy airborne systems. But working on a computer vision terminal, we had a large tube monitor, and then we had a digitized tablet. Some of us had a printer next to us and a keyboard and so on. But a lot of the stuff we did, we used this pen that had a wire come out of the back of it, and very similar to what a mouse is today, where we had 3 buttons. But we moved it around that digitized tablet, and we could program menus and so on. But just like what we did on the board, we came in to work for the day, and we had an assignment. Well, same thing here. We had an assignment, and the data had to be loaded onto the disk drive before we started the work. And each terminal that we're working on here was, linked to a disk drive. And these disk drives were, pretty big, about the size of a dishwasher, if you will. And so that data had to be loaded onto the hard drive, the disk that you see here. We call it a disk pack, and they're a little bit larger than an LP, and there may have been a dozen of them in that stack. But the data had to be loaded onto those disks at the beginning of the day for us to do the work. And at the end of the day, it was put back on the data tape that they were stored on. So every day, somebody in the working for another company, perhaps because they had contracts with the Navy, they would load the data from the tape onto the disk pack, put the disk pack in the machine, and then we would access it from our terminal. At the end of the day, the data would be removed from the disk pack, put back on the DAT tape, and the DAT tape was actually stored in a vault, and it looked very similar like this, just like you would see in a bank. All right, so that was the early mainframe system, and you can imagine, the amount of effort that went into performing our work in that fashion. So if we look at the early transformation to the digital formats, Autodesk came out with AutoCAD in the early 80s, and a lot of people had access to it. We were actually using that out there on the base as well. And what was nice about it was a smaller system. You didn't need that mainframe system, and everything was kind of loaded locally on the machine and so on. In 1988, PTC released Pro Engineer, which used a Unix workstation, 32-bit, full 3D, solid capabilities. A little bit more expensive than AutoCAD, and still by today's standard, pretty expensive. And then in 1995, SolidWorks came about, and a little bit cheaper than Pro Engineer, but still ran on a 32-bit Windows PC. You didn't necessarily need those Unix workstations anymore. Of course, by then PTC had caught up and was using the Windows PCs as well. So what they have in common, though, is they all used files, right? You had a file on the system, maybe you copied that file, put it on a disk, loaded it on another system, and so on. Maybe you saved it out to a folder, but that's what they had in common. Everything was saved to a file, and then you had different iterations of that file if you saved it again and so on, and maybe saved it to a different location, what have you. But that gets pretty problematic after a while. You start getting dozens, if not hundreds, of different iterations or versions of these files. So basically, if you think of how that worked in the 2D drawing board system, we're still working with copies of the data, right? So not much different from what we used to do before computers, right? And so, being sure that you had the latest and greatest version of the data, you really weren't sure that you had it. So even with today's PLM systems and PDM systems, you still are working kind of with these files, if you will. And so what's wrong with files? Well, if you think about the product development process, we create, a file from a CAD system, right? We create versions of these files, we save them, we may send that data to other CAD systems or suppliers and other departments, right? Well, there's different means of doing that, whether it's through an email or through a thumbnail drive, or we used to have the disk drives, of course, the floppy disks and so on. But nonetheless, we're still working with files, right? And somebody makes a change to it and sends it back, and by the time it comes back to you, you don't know if you've got the right version or not. Even with a file server system, you're still not too certain that you're working with the latest and greatest system. In a PDM system, although you have the ability to check in and check out, you're still working with a local version of that file on your workspace or on your system, right? So somebody might be making changes to something that you're using in an assembly, and if you're building to that, you're not too certain if you've got the most accurate data. Of course, with all these versions and copies and other people working on it, you can see that this kind of gets out of control pretty quickly, right? And then even still, when we're sending that data to our suppliers and our other departments, maybe even manufacturing, that data may not necessarily be the most accurate data. And a lot of times we see in manufacturing, if the data is not accurate, that they might be manufacturing to something that's an older version or an older iteration. And I've actually worked with customers where they've had issues where they've actually manufactured parts that turned out to be scrap because they manufactured to the wrong version of a paper print, or somebody had made a change to a drawing that didn't get reflected in the model, and vice versa. And so that causes a lot of problems today. And of course, everything, if we don't maintain the updates with the data, we're certainly almost guaranteed to be working with data that's out of date. Okay. So are they the root of all evil? Well, not necessarily, but certainly they are the cause of a lot of scrap and rework, and certainly IP theft. When you're sending this data out, through an email or thumbnail or what have you, whatever method you're using of transferring the data, you could be the result of having that IP stolen. Okay, so I want to jump into a demonstration here, and today we're going to build off of the demonstration that we did on the last webinar, and I want to talk about data management in Onshape, and also talk a little bit about versioning, branching, and the release and approval workflow in Onshape. So with that, I'll bring up Onshape, and when I log into Onshape, basically this is kind of my home page, right? My Onshape, and this is what I see. And so I want to kind of describe a little bit about what we're looking at here. So first of all, we have on the left here, we have our navigation tree, where we can look at things that we've recently opened, things that were created by me, things that are shared with me from other people, things that are developed with teams, and we don't have anything in here. I've kind of got a small network here of things that I've been working with. And then anything that's public, right? If I create something that's a public document, or I have a public account and I can see these things as well. But typically we'd be working in this location in the navigation tree in my Onshape. And then over here, what we have is, things that were last opened by me, if I wanted to open them again. And then I have a series of folders and documents. And really, there's a little bit of a difference, and we'll talk a little bit in detail about this, but I want to first talk about what is a document, right? In Onshape, a document really is a container that has what we would call a part studio, an assembly, there may be some drawings and maybe some imported data, what have you, but we could have several instances of each of these items within this part studio. And what I mean by that is if I wanted, or in this document, what I want to do is maybe create another part studio to create some additional parts for this product. Maybe I want to create another assembly. Maybe I want to create a drawing. Maybe I want to create a subfolder to organize things within this document. But you can think of a document as, everything that is unique to this particular product or project, right? And so if I'm going to build a bicycle, for example, the frame might be part of the project. The seat might be part of the project. The handlebars might be part of the project. And these things are unique to the bicycle, right? Once I'm done building the bicycle, I might want to add some additional components, might be the component group, the wheels. Those things might come up from another document. And if it were unique, say the wheel I would use on multiple products, I might make that in its own Onshape document. But everything else that's unique to the bicycle, I would create in this single document. And so we'll go back here to my Onshape here, and then we'll talk about folders, right? In the folders, this is a method for me to organize my projects. So I have this, TriStar templates. I'm just creating some drawing templates that I'm going to use for my drawings. And I have a sandbox. This is where I kind of just play around with stuff. And then I have this one project that I'm working on that is this Circa bolt cutter, right? And then within this folder, I have documents that are containers for the unique parts that go into this product. And I could have more than one document within the folder. And I can create subfolders to organize this data if I have a very large assembly. And so when we get into a document such as this, Acme Surecut, and I call it workflow because this is what I want to talk about today is the workflow, this is kind of a small assembly. And so everything I've done here is basically done in one part studio, which is where we develop the parts, and then one assembly where we put things together. In this assembly, I have parts that come from the part studio, and I also have some fasteners that come from a library. But pretty much everything in this is unique to this product. Now, if I wanted to, I could create an additional part studio, right? And in this, if I do that, it's basically a blank slate, but it's still part of this document or part of this unique project. Now, I might want to create a new blade for the cutter and then create another assembly using that new blade, but still use the old parts from the first assembly. So I can, kind of intermingle everything within this document to create my parts or my assemblies and my drawings and so on. All right. So I don't really want to do this. I just want to kind of go through the motions. So I'll just go ahead and delete that. But if you get the idea, we can have as many parts in this as we need and as many assemblies or sub-assemblies as we need to define our project, and as many drawings as we need as well. So going back up to my Onshape, so these things are things that I've created, right? I have some other members within my company that I might want to work on this data with me, right? So what I can do from a data management standpoint is I can share this with other users, right? So if I say share, you can see that I'm sharing this with another user already, okay? And I can share that with an individual user by finding them in my list, typing, you know, if I have a large list of users, I can, you know, type their email or their names and you know, kind of narrow down my search. I can also assign a team to this as well, or invite guests from outside, right? So in this case, I'm already sharing it with one of my users, but if I were to say, take this sandbox and share, you can see that I'm not sharing with anybody. But if I were to choose somebody from this list, they would be shared, okay? Now, if I wanted to, I could create teams for this as well. So if I go into my enterprise settings and I go to teams, and because I'm an authorized user to do this, I'm an administrator basically, I can create a team, okay? And if I give that team a name, maybe I call the team Circa, right? And then save that, right? And then in that team, right, there's Circa, I can manage the users, right? Oops. And then I'll say I want to add JP to that. Maybe I want to add somebody else, Tiago to that as well. So these become members of the team for that. So we have our all company, all users as a team. We also have, in this case, this new shortcut team that includes these other users, right? So when I go back to my Onshape and I want to now share this, I can say share this with a team, and I can pick that team off the list. And then anybody that's on that team would have access to that data. And then I can specify how I want them to be able to access it. Can they edit it, or can they just view it, and so on. Okay. So now keep in mind that all of our data is stored in the cloud. So we don't have a typical PDM system where we're doing a check out and a check in type workflow. You know, everything that we are working with is on the cloud, and then we would share it with other users, where in a traditional PDM type system, you would have perhaps silos of data that have group assignments or group permissions and so on to that. In this case, we manage that with sharing with either individuals or teams and so on. Okay. So if I need to, I can create, you know, new folders, new documents from scratch. If I give this just a name, that becomes a new document within Onshape. Right? If I go back, you can see that that scratch document is here. Okay, and again, I'm going to just delete this. I'll send it to the trash. And if I delete anything or send it to the trash, you can see that we have it here. And I'm going to select it all and just delete the two. Okay, so pretty easy to get around in your home page here, understanding how these folders work, how the documents work, and so on. If I have a very large project, I might start by creating some organizational structure by creating a folder and then subfolders, and in those subfolders, I might create documents to manage that data. If I have a very large machine or a tractor or something like that, I might want to manage it in more of a folder type structure than trying to do everything in one document. I could do everything in one document. I could have thousands of parts, but then it becomes very difficult to manage in that type of environment. So let's go ahead and do some things in this shortcut. And I created this copy of a document to work on this workflow. And again, this is the same product that I used in our last demonstration. And so if I look at the history of this, there's really, just, what we did just moments ago within this database, and that was done today, right, at 11:22, which is, just a few minutes ago. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a version for this product right now. And in my versions in history, I have the ability to create a version, and I could use the default name, or I could call this something like initial review, right? So that's kind of a snapshot, if you will. If I make changes to this main workspace, I can always revert back to that initial review. Okay, so if I do make changes, let's say, for example, I want to create a drawing, or I want to add some properties to one of these parts. So let's say, for example, I'm going to take this link and I'm going to go to properties, and I'm going to give it a description. And maybe I'll give it a part number. I'll just kind of give today's date and any other information. Maybe I want to give it a title, and I'll just use link as the title, and then we'll apply this and exit. Okay, so any changes that I've made, you can see here, those changes show up in my versions in history, right? And now what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and create a drawing for that link. So I'll right click on the link here, and I'm going to just create a drawing for that. And then we'll pick which kind of format we want, whether we want predefined views or not. I'm just going to use the default here with no views. And then it wants me to create the first view. I'm going to make it be a top view with a scale of 1. And then we'll put that right there. We'll put a projected view here and a projected view there. And then we'll add some dimensions. Maybe I want to put the width of it here, the thickness, and maybe the max dimension on the outside of the curvature. Okay, that's enough for right now. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create another version of this so that I can go back to this location. Now, typically, I'd probably do a little bit more work before creating another version, but in this case, we'll just go ahead and do that. I'll say link drawing created. Okay. And again, I can navigate through this version and history tree and show any of these snapshots in time. You know, here's the initial review. You'll notice there's no drawing down here in this tab. Right? If I go link drawing created, now of course that drawing shows up in my tabs. Right? Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead at this point, and after my design review, we decided that we wanted to try, you know, a different version or a different iteration, kind of a experiment, if you will. And we're going to create another version of this with a branch and create a new handle and maybe add some more changes. So what I'm going to do here is on this version, I'm going to create a branch. And then we're going to call this length and handle. Okay. And so now you can see how this branches off. And then that becomes what's called the active workspace. Now I haven't made any changes to it, but anything I do here now is only happening in this branch of this product. Okay. I'm going to go ahead right now and create a version, right? And I'm going to call this also initial review, just so I have something to go back to. And I'm going to make some changes to this design. So in my handle, I'm going to change the length of the handle, and it's initially 18. We're going to make that be 24. And then I'm going to change this extrude. And instead of 13, I'm going to make that be 19. I'm also going to change the thickness of this link here. So in my link features, I'm going to change the extrude, and we'll make it be 1/4 of an inch. I'm also going to go into the assembly because I made that change, and I know just from experience that this fastener now is no longer long enough because we changed the thickness of that link, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find that in my tree, and there's the other one, and I'm just going to right click, and I'm going to replace those instances, and we're going to find in my standard content library a new version for that, and I think the old version was 1 inch. So we're just going to go another 1/8 of an inch. It's already selected there for me, and we'll apply that change. So now we've got a little bit longer bolt for that, and so that works out pretty good for me. All right. And now I'm going to go ahead and create another version, and we'll call this handle length incomplete. Okay, now it's telling me this warning that these drawings should be updated before creating that version. So I'll just go ahead and copy and paste this, and we'll cancel that. And that's just an indication that this drawing needs to be updated. All right, so we'll go into the drawing. You see the old dimension here at 188, and we'll just update the drawing and make sure that that's taken care of. All right, so that looks good to me. We'll go ahead and create that version now. So now if I want to, I can actually compare the versions or the branches to see what has changed. So if I have this option here to compare and select the two that I want to compare, it shows me the differences, and it also gives me this little drag handle so I can kind of drag it between the two so I can kind of see what changes have been made. That's kind of a neat little feature, right? Okay. So now I'll go back to this. So if I wanted to at this point, I could create another branch off of the main branch, or I can create another branch off of this if I wanted to try some new design variations for experimental purposes. I could do that very easily. If I want to go back and work on the main version again, I could do that. Okay, and as you can see, the drawing is going to revert back to the original drawing, which the dimension was 188. Right, I can go to any one of these versions in time and see what changes were made. I can expand on them to see the changes, who made the change. Okay, so again, you may see situations where you've done many design variations. You can branch them in the tree and just experiment with that. And when it comes time to release the documents, you can release it from those different branches, release any number of parts or drawings or combination or assembly. So to do that release, let's take a look at the release workflow first. So I'm going to go over here to my enterprise settings, and I'm going to look at release management. And this is just a default release management workflow that comes with the enterprise version of Onshape. So if you work for a company, you would get an enterprise version, and you would have this release workflow. So it's just a standard release workflow. Anything that we create is something that's in process. When we release it, we have the choice to require an approval or not. If there's no approval acquired, it goes straight to released. If there is an approval required, it'll be pending upon approval or rejection. Okay, because I'm the administrator here, I can kind of set up my revision scheme if I want to. Maybe I want to change that from an alphanumeric or an alphabetical release scheme or a numeric release scheme, or create a custom. I can automatically generate part numbers if I want. Manual is default, but if I want to, I can specify that my part numbers are automatically created with a prefix and a suffix and so on. I really, in my history, have never worked with a company that did automatic part number generation. It's always been manual. We've always had to go and get a block of numbers for a project and then use those numbers that are assigned. Okay, this is one that I like to turn on. The drawing can reuse the part number. This is nice because I like to keep those two together, and if I'm doing a search for the part numbers, I can have access to both the part and the drawing with the same search, right? We look down here to access. I mean, this tells me who can edit the, access these release, right? So only administrators can edit the properties of released objects. Only administrators can mark objects, and only administrators can delete documents containing released objects. So this is just kind of who has access to these. So you have some actions, if you have a drawing and you want it to be marked that it's unreleased, we can have a watermark on that. And then there are some conditions, when released, the drawing is a pending update, right? So just some things that we might want to set. Okay, and then some requirements. If I want to have force a note, for example, I could turn that on as well, which forces a note during the release process. Okay, I'm going to just leave everything like I've set it here. We'll go back to my project. And I'm going to work in this branch. And I'm going to select the drawing, and I'm going to release the drawing. So when I do that, the drawing wants to pull the part with it. Of course, I can't really release the drawing without the part. But if I wanted to, I could also release additional items here. I can select different things to add to this release process. But in this case, I'm just going to release the link just to show you kind of what happens. And then I'm also going to give the drawing a part number as well. And then if I wanted to, I could just give it a note. This is initial release. And then if I wanted to, I could specify an approver. Now, if I use an approver, and I've set my release scheme so that I don't have to necessarily use an approver, but if I do use an approver, it's going to send a notice to that person and ask them to review the release and then either approve or reject it. But since I'm not forcing that, I can simply go to release right here. Okay, if I'm working for a small company and I'm maybe 1 or 2 users and I have full control, I might do that. But for a larger company, I might need to specify a release approver, and I could specify that as a requirement also in the release process. Okay, in this case, I'm going to just set myself as the approver so you can kind of see what happens here, and we'll submit. Now a notice shows up saying that release handle lengthen requires your approval. So if I was another user, that would go to that user. This also sends an email to that user. So if I wait a few moments, I'll see an email appear here. Well, I don't have my Outlook running, but this will send an email just in case you're not on the system at the time, right? So it sends an email to me that I can access from anywhere, that I can access my email, and it tells me that I've got a release pending my approval. All right. So in this case, I can view the release. What's happening here? We got the link drawing in the link, revision A. We've got a part number, and I can either reject this and give a reason why I want to reject it, or I can just go ahead and approve the release. Okay. And that's going to send another notification saying that that release has been approved. All right. And I get another email to see that as well. Okay, so that's been approved. No worries there. Okay. So with that, I've shown you pretty much everything I want to show you today, and so I'd like to open up for questions for anybody that has any questions. And I'm going to allow you to, go ahead and type your questions in the chat window. So Alex, I'm not seeing any questions come through.
Yep, it looks like that is it. Thank you everyone for attending. A recording is going to be sent automatically to everyone that registered, or you can feel free to visit our YouTube channel or website. And I do encourage everyone to visit TriStar.com and go to Onshape if you want to request a trial or want more information. With that, thank you everyone for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day, and have a good Friday and weekend.
Thank you, everybody.